Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special program with authors Jaimee Wriston and Minrose Gwin. This is our kickoff program for Women's History Month, which highlights contributions of women to events in history and contemporary society. We're pleased to be commemorating and encouraging the study, observance, and celebration of the vital role of women in history with tonight's program. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our guests. We have Jaimee Wriston, who is the author of 6 previous books of fiction, which won the WILLA Literary Fiction Prize, Zephyr Prize International Book Award in Fiction, Short Stories, IPPY Gold Medal, and the CMY Book Award in Fiction, and others. She's been a finalist for the American Fiction Prize, Forward Indies Book of the Year, and the International Book Award in Literary Fiction. Her stories have been published in numerous literary journals, and originally from Hawaii, she is Distinguished Professor of English and Creative Writing at SUNY Binghamton University. Minrose Gwin is the author of the novels The Queen of Palmyra, a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers Pick, and finalist for the John Gardner Fiction Book Award. Promise, which was shortlisted for the Willie Morris Award in Southern Literature, and The Accidentals, which received the 2020 Mississippi Institute for Arts and Letters Award in Fiction. She has also published a memoir, Wishing for Snow, about the collision of poetry and psychosis in her mother's life, and 4 books of literary and cultural criticism, most recently Remembering Medgar Evers, Writing the Long Civil Rights Movement. She is co-editor of The Literature and the American South, a Northern anthology. Minrose began her writing career as a journalist and later taught at universities across the country, most recently the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she is Kenan Eminent Professor Emerita of English. So please join me in welcoming tonight's speakers, Jaimee Wriston and Minrose Gwin. It's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Giovanna, both for having Minrose and myself, and all of you for coming. I know it's a busy time of year, so we appreciate very much your being here, and also to Jennifer at the Village Bookstore for carrying our books. So the way we're going to do it tonight, I'm going to introduce a brief summary of my book and do a short reading from it, and then Minrose is going to do the same with her book, and then we will kind of start a discussion with each other. At any point, if you are ready to give us questions in the chat, Giovanna will forward those to us and we'll go from there. So, How Not to Drown is about the effects of inherited trauma on generations of the MacQueen family of Sea Haven, Massachusetts in the present time and the Isle of Skye in 1850. There are 3 principal female MacQueens: Maggie, thrown out of their family home during the brutal Highland clearances in 1850, who's forced to take a harrowing emigration voyage with her sister across the Atlantic to the New World. Then 4 generations later, Amelia MacQueen, a 70-year-old former model, battles ageism while trying to support her family after the drowning death of her favorite but drug-addicted son, which her daughter-in-law went to prison for, and the resulting custody of Heaven, their child, and her granddaughter, a word Amelia hates and a role she's not excited to take on. Still, she's determined to make it work by enforcing her resolve on Heaven, of course. But 12-year-old Heaven arrives with her own ideas. She's being bullied in school and develops a creative but devastating plan for seeking revenge on her nemesis, based on the lore her uncle, Amelia's less favored son, tells her from the Isle of Skye. Meanwhile, the town is slowly being drowned by rising sea levels due to climate change and its frequent, ever more violent nor'easters. So I'm going to read a brief scene where Amelia first meets Heaven after an unsettling dream she had about her son, then a scene from the following chapter a couple months later in Heaven's point of view. So you'll get to kind of hear the perspectives of both of those. An intense fall sun slices like a blade into her kitchen windows, exposing layers of dust on the windowsills lurking like dandruff. You lounged by your pool and ignored us, but here we are, your personal detritus, waiting for you. Not that Amelia lounges. She spent the summer fighting for custody of her son's 12-year-old daughter, whom she'd never met, then panicked when it was granted. How could she take care of a 12-year-old, for God's sake? What had she been thinking? What would she feed her? How would she entertain her? What do 12-year-olds even do these days? What can she teach this child about a world where what happened to her father happened? Plus, let's admit it, she thinks now, having his child here will hardly bring back Gavin, now will it? She shakes her head, a foggy sensation like cobwebs behind her eyes. God, did she end up swallowing both halves of that Xanax somehow? Well, the upshot is that none of it matters. The girl is moving in today, her granddaughter. There's an innocence about her, the social worker had said on the phone last night, her obligatory call announcing the next day's ETA, she called it. Meaning she's good, well-behaved, what exactly? Amelia asked. No, more like she's taken herself out of time, if you will. Happens sometimes with kids subjected to an adult world they're not ready for. My, taken herself out of time, if you will. I'd like some tips on how that's accomplished, Amelia said. This child has been deprived of a normal childhood. Naturally, the state hopes you'll give that back to her. The social worker rambled on, missing or ignoring Amelia's sarcasm entirely. Since she will be living in your home in Massachusetts, the state of Maine requires periodic progress reports so we can review her acclimation. Acclimation? Amelia had sighed. She's hardly moving to the Amazon, is she? She won't need her immunizations to live in Massachusetts. Well, the social worker said, it's a heap of paperwork, I'll tell you that. Now Amelia fixes herself a cup of ginger tea to combat the sourness curdling in her stomach whenever she remembers the dream or whatever it was, that moment when she's in the water underneath him, needing to breathe, needing him to breathe, pushing him up the way she once pushed him out of her. And once again, he does nothing to help, not even his arms pump. Wouldn't you at least pump your arms if you were trying to live? She stares out the window over the kitchen counter, the late September sun lighting up what's left of her garden. 2 deeply red overripe tomatoes, a tangle of cucumber vines climbing a trellis, and her flowers. The houses closer to the ocean in her Sandy Hills neighborhood don't have green lawns. With the increasing severity of nor'easters, tidal surges kill the grass and leave beach stones in their wake. But she prides herself on her flowers, making these at least grow. Amelia rubs her eyes, their insistent wetness today, careful not to smudge her mascara as a white sedan with main plates pulls into her driveway. Allergies, she tells herself. She'll let that lurking dust settle. One could imagine its glitter as moments of mica rather than dead skin cells, mites, and debris. Amelia spent a lifetime putting the decorative spin on things. As a model, and then the former model moniker, Hepburn-esque, they called her, she'd gotten used to a level of worship not conducive to her present stage, the senior generation next to check out. I'm out of here, they used to say, nary a thought to anything this close to permanence. Once again, she shrugs off that foggy sensation from last night, the gnawing sense of loss, of abandonment. Gavin in her nightmare, for God's sake, never mind a dream, let's call it what it was. She marches down the hall and opens the front door to his daughter, motioning her and the social worker inside. Heaven, this is your grandma, the social worker chirps after Amelia shuts the door. Oh, please, am I white-haired and stooped? I was Amelia to your father and uncle, so how about you call me Grandmelia? She nods at the girl, expecting some sort of acknowledgement. It's rather clever, isn't it? This amalgamation of a name with ugh, a generation marker. Heaven just stares at the wall, a stocky child with an empty gaze, bland as a bowl of pudding. Or rice? No, rice has some definition to it, an actual structure to the grain, whereas this girl's entire persona emanates unformed flesh, not like her father at all, Amelia decides, her handsome, charismatic, murdered son. Heaven, who names a child that, she had barked to her former husband after the court-ordered custody was finalized. The court chose her over Leo, who'd been exhibiting odd behavior of late, his phone and internet paranoia, wandering and forgetting where he wandered from, forgetting his keys to get back inside once inside was deemed spy-free, so a thin victory indeed. With a mother named Cassiopeia, if they'd had a boy, he'd have probably been Mars or just cut to the chase with planet, she said to Leo. Leo had the audacity to chuckle as if any of this was a joke. And now switching over to Heaven, this is a couple months later. Well, actually a month, it says it right here. It's been less than a month since she was dropped off at this place, and already her grandmother has ordained herself Queen of Heaven's sucky life. You simply can't go to the harvest dance in polyester, Grandmelia declared last night over a mac and cheese dinner. Grandmelia, like she thinks that name makes her only half a grandma or something. Whatever, it's not like Heaven wanted to call her grandma. The dinner was Uncle Daniel's request, though Grandmelia had to make it since he won't come out of his room. A side of curly fries and chocolate marshmallow ice cream for dessert, Heaven's favorite. In fact, all of it was Heaven's favorite, and she devoured every bit, her grandmother frowning, staring at Heaven's chubby arms, potato cheeks, her almost boobs. Okay, the boobs are mostly fat, but without that fat, good Christ, and Uncle Daniel way of talking, Heaven would have nothing there at all. And Bethany Harrison, a size B plus, she bragged in the middle school girls' bathroom, would rag her even worse. Yesterday, Bethany and her wannabes cornered Heaven in the bathroom and forced her to lift up her t-shirt. Show us your itty bitty titty bra, size AAA minus, Bethany snickered. And the flock of blonde-headed Bethany as if snorted. And Juniper Mayberry, pronounced Mayberry, accent up, she'd corrected Heaven, squeezed out a fart, Heaven in the line of fire. What world does Grandmelia think Heaven lives in? Not a world where she would voluntarily go to a 7th grade dance, that's for sure. It would have to be punishment for the worst crime, kidnapping Bethany Harrison at gunpoint, tying her up in the trunk of Grandmelia's car, then dropping her off at the town dump when Grandmelia does her weekly run, all dug out and smelly, seagulls poking about like rats, plus plenty of real rats too, just another bag of garbage. And this punishment on the heels of Heaven's fingers being held there until it popped, her face pushed into the toilet. Passing out would be better than going to that dance. But Grandmelia kept at it, pointing to the flyer. Meet your friends, dance to the music selected by our junior DJ, Rossum Ross, at the Harvest Dance. Someone had taped it to the back of Heaven's jacket as a joke. Grandmelia didn't get it. No one expected her to go. No one wanted her to go. Tomorrow, the South Shore Mall, Grandmelia declared, will purchase a suitable outfit. Outfit. Even the word wasn't part of Heaven's life. Grandmelia was up for this thing because she figured this was what an almost teenager should be doing with her time. You're almost a teenager, she said. So of course you want to go to the school dance. Every girl wants to go to a dance. I don't, Heaven said. Why not? Are you a lesbian? Grandmelia asked. No. I mean, I don't think so. I don't know. I just don't want to go. I wouldn't care if you're a lesbian, mind you. It's not a judgment. There are plenty of times in my own life when things might have gone better if I preferred women. Men can be trouble, and that's a fact. You must keep your wits about you and outsmart them at every turn. But if you're not, you're not. And if you are not a lesbian, then there's no excuse for not going to that dance. I could go if I was a lesbian if I wanted to, but I don't. This after Heaven proposed she stick pins in her eyeballs or swallow rocks rather than go. Grandmelia has no clue what it's like at that school for heaven. She had a brief window, what was left of September and 1 week into October, a honeymoon period when the kids left her alone due to her status as the new girl, while they figured out her rank and their social order. Then all hell broke loose, an outcast, a fat one at that, according to Bethany Harrison, the meanest mean girl in mean girl history. And every day brought some new assault, snarks about her body, mouth farts, tripping her, helpful suggestions like, why don't you commit suicide? Posting shit about her on Facebook and Snapchat, which Heaven can't see because Grandmelia won't get her a smartphone. And their so-called jokes. Yesterday's was sticking her backpack in the boys' bathroom where Josh Cunningham said he peed on it. It was wet when he tossed it to her. It's a joke, Josh said. Smell test, someone yelled. Then the bell rang for first period and everyone scattered, leaving her standing in the hall beside her wet backpack, late for class again. And I will stop there and let the wonderful Minrose regale you.
Oh, Jaimie, that was wonderful. I just love this book. I just love this book. And I love all the characters in it, the women, the girl, you know, Heaven, Amelia, Maggie, the Scottish girl. You have this talent for creating these vivid, memorable, mesmerizing kinds of characters. So
well,
thank
coming
you.
from
This
you,
book is-
Minrose,
yeah.
with your beautiful,
This is-
beautiful, beautiful novel, which they are about to get to hear a slice of.
Well, this is so much fun to be here with Jaimie, and I want to echo her thanks to the Harrison Library and to the Village Bookstore for handling the book sales. It's just a thrill to be here with one of my favorite authors. Jaimie's novel goes back to the clearances in Scotland in the 1850s when the crofters were being taken off their land because the landlords wanted more grazing territory. The Accidentals, my novel, begins 100 years later in the United States. And one of the things that my concern has been in writing the 3 novels that I have written is how much history molds women's, female lives, women's lives, girls' lives, how much time and place makes such a difference. So we're in the mid-1950s as my novel begins. And the world's first Sputnik dog, a little Russian mutt named Laika, has just been shot up into space and in a capsule the size of a rural mailbox. And there's the violent imprint of Jim Crow in the South has been uncovered in the brutalized corpse of Emmett Till in 1955 in Mississippi. The Cold War is revving up, and not last but certainly not least is the kind of effect that this period of the 1950s in the United States had on women. Women during World War II, many of them, and I'm sure that most of you know this, worked in the factories, worked in many male-oriented professions since the men were all away fighting World War II. And then when the 50s emerged and the war was over, many of these women were forced back into the domestic sphere. Some of them quite willingly took on the maternal roles. Others Others did not fit well into the maternal roles, into the role of wife and mother. And one such character, one such woman is my character, Olivia Mcallister, whom the novel begins with. She lives in a small mill town in South Mississippi, and she's the mother of 2 girls. The first one is named Grace, the other June, respectively 12 and 10 years old. Olivia has dreams of returning to her pre-war management job in a landing boat factory in New Orleans. And like so many women over time, she wants her old life back. She wants a future out in the world. She wants to travel to Paris. She wants to go back to school and learn more about birds. She's very, very interested in the habits of birds. And in fact, begins to sing like birds, back to birds, as she sits at home and waits for her girls to come home from school. She thinks of herself, in fact, as a migratory bird who's been blown off course, a bird that's been spatially displaced, what's called an accidental, which is where the title of the book comes from. And when she finds herself pregnant, and she's tricked into that pregnancy by her husband, Holly, who, above all else, wants to have a boy. And so he tricks her into becoming pregnant. And so out of sheer desperation, she goes to a backwoods, what were then called chiropractor, for an illegal abortion. And the results are tragic, and they spiral out into the next half century. This book has a very long timeline. Profoundly, her death, and I'm not telling you anything about the plot because she dies in the first chapter. Her death profoundly affects her daughters, Grace and June, throughout their whole lives. And not only her daughters, but the other 4 characters in the novel. And all of whom, in some way or another, even though they may not even know Olivia, become accidentals in one way or the other. So in that sense, Olivia is a kind of ghost that hovers over the whole novel. I'm going to read tonight a passage I've never read before, but given the particular moment in history we're in right now regarding women's right to choose, regarding the abortion issue, I am going to read a little bit from the first chapter, and this is in Olivia's voice. So I'm going to start now. On Friday morning, right after Holly left for work and the girls set out for school, I went out and sat down on the top step of our front porch to wait. I had packed a paper sack with everything they told me to pack, some pads and a belt, a change of clothes, the roll of cash that felt as warm and alive as a small animal in my palm. I crouched like a cat under the hummingbird feeder, keeping my head low, watching the street out of the corner of my eye. The birds were swooping in and out, fighting for the syrup, filling up for the long migration to a warmer place. Some had already left. Their numbers dwindled every day. After a while, a rusty pickup truck clattered up and stopped. The driver, a gaunt woman in a man's sweater, rolled down the window and looked hard at me. I came down the sidewalk and climbed in. "Hello," I said. She looked at me strangely, as if I'd said something completely unexpected. The vertical lines in her face called to mind the veins of a large sycamore tree. The truck coughed and sputtered and died. She cranked it back up and gunned it, smoke billowing from the rear end. "You got the money?" "Yes." I lifted the paper sack. "I'll take it now." I pulled out the roll of bills and handed it to her. She sat there, slowly counting out the 20s, then put the roll between her legs and let out on the clutch. We rode along in silence. The truck's engine was running ragged, and the cab reeked of exhaust. After a few blocks, I began to shiver and quake. It started in my bottom from the vibration, then traveled down to my knees, which began to knock together. I considered telling the woman to turn around and take me home, but something about the way her hands clenched the steering wheel, the forward tilt of her head, kept me quiet. We took a dark road off Highway 90, turning inland, and continued on for what seemed like 5 or so miles. the truck pitching wildly when the tires caught a rut. I'll be home by 3, you say? I needed to be there before the girls got home. Then I could lie down and tell them I didn't feel well. That, at least, they were used to. The woman took another turn onto a narrow road before 3. The sugar maples that overlapped the road were orange and red. It was as if I were being driven through a tunnel of fire. My legs had taken on a life of their own, jumping about like oversized crickets. I felt a burning deep inside, low in my belly. Perhaps it was an untangling itself, as eager to be gone as I was to let it go. The woman glanced at my lively legs. It ain't that bad, she said. She took one last turn onto a dirt drive and through a stand of dark pines. Underneath them, the house, colorless as air, looked like a child's playhouse. With the window shades pulled all the way down, the filthy panes stared blindly. Taped in one of the front windows, Cairo treatments, pain, P-A-N-E, free. When I got out of the truck, my legs buckled. The ground felt rubbery. The woman came around and took my elbow. Don't go wasting folks' own good time now. She led me up through the waist-high weeds to the front door, and we went in. I was expecting a waiting room, a neatly dressed receptionist behind a desk, but there was only a dark, dusty corridor with closed doors up and down. As we walked down the hall with its peeling wallpaper and filthy linoleum floor, I heard murmurs, then an exclamation of surprise. There was a stink of rancid bacon grease. I began to gag. The woman opened the door to the third room on the right. I had imagined an examining table with stirrups, but instead there was a regular bed and over it a contraption hanging from the ceiling, a stained piece of canvas with some belts. It looked jerry-rigged and oddly sexual. The unexpectedness of the device's foreignness sucked the breath from my chest. I'd left Earth for another planet, never to return to the dear familiar. These people would kill me and steal my money. I would be buried out in the woods under the pine needles, never to be found. Holly and the girls would think I'd just taken off, left them for another kind of life. I turned around intent on heading out the door when the woman told me to take off my underwear and lie down. She handed me a frayed sheet to put over my legs and said the doctor would be with me shortly. After she left the room, I collapsed on the bed and put my head between my legs to keep from fainting. Should I run? I willed myself to think straight. I thought of real work you could see. Those Louisiana swamp boats stretching out into the night, landing on the coast of Normandy, saving us all. The girls were growing up. Now was my time to build something new. I picked up the sheet. Its ordinariness calmed me. Then a fat man in a stained white jacket came into the room. He gave me 2 pills that looked like aspirin, told me to think about something pleasant. Once when I was a girl, my mother took me on a Greyhound bus to the ocean. Late that afternoon, we stood out on the beach watching the sun go down. A dog ran in and out of the surf, a stick in its mouth. Pelicans skimmed the waves in perfect formation. My mother's hair blew up against her cheek, a piece snagged on her eyelash. She said, "There's a whole world out there, Olivia. There are places where people sit at tables in the street and drink and eat all day long. They sit under trees and the blossoms fall in their hair." She turned to me, her hair now blown back from her face, and I saw she was crying. So that's my reading from this very first chapter of my novel. And I thought that maybe Jaimie and I could, just to start off the conversation, Jaimie, we're dealing with very different social issues in different time frames too. Part of your novel is in the 1850s, and then a much larger part of it is in a contemporary period, right? Yeah. And so but on the other hand, in terms of women's lives and women characters and so forth, I think we're dealing with different histories and different social issues, but perhaps there's a commonality in the fact that the women and girls in our novels are battling both societal expectations and family dysfunction, both at the same time. And I think this is especially true maybe of Amelia and How Not to Drown. She's I think fighting a little bit the stereotype of the grandmother. She doesn't want to be a grandmother and so forth. Also, there's Maggie, the earlier character, the daughter of peasants in Scotland, who has been totally displaced by forces outside her own control. So you may want to talk about that, and you may want to talk about some of your other characters too in this regard.
Yeah, thanks, Minrose. Actually, I was thinking of that exact same subject when you were talking about, Olivia and of course so many women of the 1950s, the post-war years, when suddenly they are not working in factories and having a livelihood for themselves and a life, but are sort of channeled back into the home to be homemakers and cook for their husbands and have children and not expected to do much else. So Olivia is battling that, and Maggie to a certain extent as well. So this is almost contemporary. I think it's about 2012 in the present day time of my book. And so Maggie would have been born, I'm terrible at math. Anyway, she would have been a baby in the 50s. So when Olivia is battling that, she's still growing up with some expectations put on her as to who she's going to be. Of course, then she grows up and, the 60s and 70s, and that's kind of blown apart, but she still is out of sync with the expectations of both what a mother should be like and a grandmother. And in the real time here, she's of course particularly fighting this idea of grandmahood and the expectations that somehow she will no longer try to work or support her family, that she's going to simply, kind of start a lot of baking and be there only for her granddaughter. And so one of the things I was kind of interested in talking about in terms of character development, and Minrose, jump in at any time, was just this this idea that sometimes even readers will have of a particular role that a woman inherits. And now I'm thinking of the likable character. Maggie, for a while in the novel, grates up against a lot of people's expectation. She opens the door to her granddaughter, whom she's never seen, and she's not, let me hug you. Oh my gosh, I've got a grand. It's more like, okay, you look a little like rice, or, she has all these other, she's not likable in that sense, but she is trying very desperately to be her own person against a society that is expecting her to be something else. And I was thinking of that with Olivia too, who wanted a much bigger life, and suddenly she's pregnant for a third time, and there's no way out. Once she has that baby, there'd be no way out. Of course, we know she doesn't have the baby, but that was the choice she had to make, the really desperate choice.
Yeah, and I think with Amelia, who wanting to be called Grandmelia, is that how it's said?
Yes, a grandma and Amelia, an amalgamation.
Yeah,
she thought it was so clever.
Yeah, and then I was thinking that one thing I think to think about that I've thought a lot about is my mother was in many ways a great deal like Olivia in my novel. And one of the things that her life, my mother's life, and my mother ended up mentally damaged, was that that these things are very serious with women, and there is a lot of damage that can be done by just being born in the wrong time and wrong place. We're talking about Women's History Month and the contributions of women throughout history. But so many women, I think, were also victims of history and did not quite know how to move through a period. In the case of my novel, there's no birth control pills. It's pre-Roe v. Wade, and so whatever choices are made, and we say, okay, Olivia made a choice. I'm sorry. My character made a choice that. Those choices are so constricted, and so that they almost don't feel like choices at all. And so I think that's true perhaps of your earlier character, Maggie, from Scotland, who is how old, 16, 15 years old when
Right.
she has to take that voyage to the New World, but to America, but it's not through her choice. And a really interesting character in your novel is Maggie's mother, who is so strong and determined, but to her own detriment in many ways, as she is put off her land.
Yeah, I particularly loved that character. I mean, the family was a close family. It did not have the dysfunction that happened later on through the generations. The MacQueens of the Isle of Skye, though they were poor, and the children basically were little workers from the time they grew up to bedtime. They had love between them, but it was the mother that was the strong one, and it was the mother who stood up against the and not the father who stood up against when the men came to push them out of their house and warn her that if she didn't get out, the house was going to be burned, etc., which of course does happen. And I don't know how many of you listening know about the clearances in the Scottish Hebrides during the 1800s, and it was brutal. It was basically clearing whole. That's why I call the clearances clearing whole villages of tenant farmers, so that sheep, which were considered more profitable at one point, could graze, and the landlords could make money off of them. So this family was cleared, and it was the mother who fought, got hit on the head as a result, and it's the mother all the way through who kind of holds on. And we leave her for a while, and then we go to Maggie's story on this emigration trip, but we do find out that in the end, the mother lives to see the law changed in the UK, such that this sort of throwing out of tenant farmers was no longer legal. But yeah, she was I like to make a character who could be a winner while essentially being a loser. She lost everything, but she won insofar as knowing she was right about that kind of behavior.
And that older historical story in your novel, Jaimie, and what you just said about the mother, one of the things I think that I've thought about so much is that you really can't think of, we really can't think of gender outside of other spheres, you know, race, class. The people in Scotland the peasants were very poor. They managed to subsist, but they were very poor. And in my novel, there's an African American, most of my characters are white in my novel, but there's an African American character whose whole fate is linked to the fact that she is an African American woman. She is a Black woman who is actually made to serve a long prison sentence simply because she is Black. And we're pretty clear about that. So I think that whenever we talk about women, we have to think about those other factors
right.
that go into being a woman and what being a woman in certain kinds of circumstances means.
Yeah. She was a wonderful character. All the characters in that novel are so memorable. But the other thing that is really memorable to me, shifting a little bit away from women, is the use of animals in the giraffes and the giraffe dancing, as well as your inspiration. I was reading for the novel in the first place, which was, as you had mentioned earlier in this program, the fate of, is it pronounced Laika, the little Sputnik dog? Oh my, when I read that in your novel, I just sobbed, and I almost don't know that I could hear it here, but between that and the giraffes and the birds in your novel, I just, I was a fan immediately. Maybe you could talk about that inspiration a little bit and how all those things came together.
Well, when I start a novel, I usually start it from an image. And in this case, there were 3 different images. But the primary one was this image of the Sputnik dog, Laika, who was found wandering the streets of Moscow. Along with some other small dogs. And the Russian scientists were trying to find a sentient being to put into space. So they chose Laika, though, out of all the other dogs, because what they did was they took all these dogs and they put them in smaller and smaller and smaller and more constricted spaces. And Laika was the one who managed that the best. She was sweet, she was compliant, and she managed to. And if you see pictures of her, she's a beautiful little dog. And you see pictures of her, and she's in a area about this small, and so what has struck me a lot about the relationship between history and women's lives, getting back to Women's History Month, is that oftentimes there's a real fracture between what women's lives are and what men's lives are. And so here we are in the middle of getting ready to, the heavens are opening up to us. Everyone is in the space race, trying to get to the moon, trying to get out into space first, the Russians in the US particularly. And so here is this huge amount of space, but here's this tiny little dog in this tiny little constricted space. It struck me as kind of an image or metaphor for women's lives during that period. When they were forced into smaller and smaller spaces there at the end of World War II. One of the things that I tried to do in my novel was to, the animals kind of took over this novel, to tell you the truth. I think we both know that what makes writing so challenging, so exciting, are all the surprises that the work has up its sleeve, you know. And another image I saw was this picture. The New Orleans Zoo, Audubon Park Zoo, has this area where giraffes can kind of roam fairly freely, and they do this thing called necking, and they hit each other, they knock into each other, and I had this vision of these two young girls, Grace and June, even as their mother is lying hemorrhaging to death in her bed, who are at the zoo. Their father's taken them to the zoo, and they are watching these giraffes do this natural thing in very constricted circumstances. So yeah, Jaimie, if I could, I'd like to ask you about this ongoing theme in your novel pertaining to drowning. Every character has some kind of experience with drowning, whether it's psychological or actual. And there of course, there's a death, Amelia's son, from drowning, which is why she has Heaven, her granddaughter, who is anything but heavenly in terms of her behaviors.
She's tough.
But there's this thread. There's also this thread in the novel, and I know this from reading your other work about climate change and how the coastlines are going to be underwater, and we're all going to be drowning unless we live out here in the Southwest where I do, and we're going to be burning up. But could you talk about climate change and how you incorporate that into this novel, and also in the lives of these women too?
Yeah, absolutely. That is kind of like with what you were saying with animals. That is one of my themes that I probably would have to fight to get out. It comes in anyway, because like many of us, it's becoming such a huge concern. But of course, I didn't start out with it because, you at least for me, to say I'm gonna write a novel about climate change where the coasts are drowning and then I'm gonna add people in it, it's not gonna work. You have to start with your people, your characters, and through your characters, you find a story. And then through that story, that's when you are able to bring in, or they come in really organically. I mean, honestly, I didn't say I'm going to have this the section with Heaven and Amelia or work toward a huge storm where which is happening in this area of Massachusetts. This is a fictional town, by the way, but it is based on a real town that I know very well, that I lived in for a while. That is drowning. I mean, every time a nor'easter happens, the beaches are gone, and sweeps up into the street, etc. So that came into the story. The first part of the story was that came to me was the Scottish story, the story of the Isle of Skye. But I always knew that somehow it was going to be a story about inheritance, and that I wasn't just going to do the historical angle. But once I got them on that emigration ship, which is what happened once these people were burned out of their homes, they had the choice of, living on the beaches in the Hebrides and starving, or taking one of these ships over to the New World. And it wasn't just the Americas. New Zealand and Australia in particular, were also popular places where these ships were going. Once I got them on that ship, there was no doubt there was going to be a shipwreck. I mean, it happened all the time with these particular ships. So the drowning aspect, and of course, as Minrose knows, there's some magical realism that happens once there is this shipwreck. And I don't want to spoil it for those of you who might actually want to read it, which would be nice, but something happens where she is actually able to become the the eyes and the voice of a being through the centuries to the actual to the time, the 2012 or so when it takes place. So there was that drowning, there was the literal drowning of Gavin, but beyond that, there's metaphorical use of drowning. There's drug addiction that's going on. There's drowning in debt. Maggie's father, this so-called MacQueen fortune that was amassed once they started into America is quickly, he's a gambler and he loses that money very quickly. So there's metaphorical use of drowning, there's literal drowning, and then there is the drowning from climate change that is going on. And I managed to get that all into the novel. So it's challenging and a lot of fun. And it took many, many long years.
You definitely did. Don't you have a personal experience with drowning too?
I do. Yes, I do. And obviously I didn't, because here I am, but it was close. It was close. And it was very frightening. It was very traumatic. I had PTSD for, actually, interestingly enough, and I believe it or not, I am just thinking about this. I was suffering PTSD until I started writing this book. And when I started writing, yeah, particularly when I did the research going over to the Isle of Skye and taking this arduous 10-mile hike to find where my own family, which, this is my family history, came from the Isle of Skye under the same circumstances, and where I thought their croft would be. I kind of researched that, and taking that hike and then coming back and having that information and starting the book, I just, there's a few scenes in the book about drowning that, I was crying when I was writing it because it's shaking, speaking of the shaking knees of poor Olivia, because it was coming back to me, but I guess I wrote it out. Thank you for asking that. Isn't that silly? No, I am seriously just thinking about that. I knew that the PTSD got better, but I didn't know exactly what to account for that. And that was it. So writing really can save you. Writing and reading.
There is a character in your novel who has PTSD from almost drowning, right?
Yep, which of course is, I almost drowned because I am here, but yeah, he has PTSD, and actually he's the other uncle that you heard, those of you in the audience that you heard mentioned from, I guess I just mentioned it in the introduction to it, but he has PTSD and very bad agoraphobia. He just stays in his room, but he spins these tales from the Isle of Skye to heaven. And this is a saving grace for her. So there's a lot of both, drowning and metaphorical drownings, but also savings, people saving one another, storytelling and mythology, in particular, the mythology from the Isle of Skye, Celtic mythology and Gaelic, that really saves characters as well.
And I think Maggie kind of hovers over the other characters in the novel in a spiritual and kind of a spectral kind of way too, as well. So why don't we, Giovanna, are there any questions from the listeners that we might want to address?
At the moment, there are not, but I will start us off with a question, because you have such well-developed characters in both of your books, and all flawed, for better or for worse, which makes them all the more interesting. Which character was the most challenging for you to write?
Jaimie, you want to take that one first?
Well, I didn't want to just jump in. I don't know. I suppose in my case, it would be Maggie, because it was really important for, not Maggie, excuse me, Amelia, because it was really important for me to get her right. She does come across for the first half of the novel as really tough and bristling and the sort of person that you're a little intimidated by, because they don't have a whole lot of they're not going to necessarily watch what comes out of their mouth. They're going to say the first thing that comes out of their mouth, and she is a little tough on Heaven, but Heaven is up to it. Heaven is kind of equally but the reason Maggie was hard, because I fell in love with her. I loved her, and she is battling ageism, which is an awful thing in this society. But again, particularly for women, I think a little bit for men. They're just this idea that when people reach a certain age, they should just sort of retire, and now with the pandemic, they're the ones who will probably, get sick. And it's like, well, the rest of us will go on, and, these people will just not. So between Amelia's battles with ageism, with her own sense of identity of who she is, it's hard for her to manage who she was, because she was hot stuff for a while, with who she is now. And I wanted to get that right. I wanted people to feel that and feel that talk about cancel culture. I mean, it's like canceling somebody. You've come to a certain age, therefore, that's it. So that she was challenging for me to make sure I got her right. How about you, Minrose?
Well, I got to say that you did. I thought you really gave us a sense of Amelia, because she was a beautiful woman, and she still is a beautiful woman, but she feels cast aside in certain ways. And I think that ageism is so right. So apt a term. When you think about her and how she's fighting against this kind of grandmotherly demeanor and stereotype and so forth and so on. Well, to answer that question, Giovanna, I think I'd have to say that it wasn't so much one character as it was two, and that is the two sisters, Grace and June. A great deal of the novel comes pretty soon after, and in the immediate years after Olivia's death through that botched abortion. And my novel, Jaimie and my novel have multiple points of view, but Jaimie, except for one character, has hers are in the omniscient, close third person, right? And mine are all in the first person, direct, speech. And so what my problem with Grace and June was that they were so close when they were girls, and particularly so after their mother's death, when they were thrown together. Grace was kind of a motherly figure to June. June was always being a little more childish than Grace. But as they grew older and their voices changed, what I found in my several first drafts, and like Jaimie, I spent years on this novel, is that Grace and June sounded too much alike. And so I had to make some sort of strong attempt to take this web that I'd woven them with and pull it apart so that they were individuals and had their own distinctive voices. I hope I succeeded in that, but it was hard because they were so close to begin with that, to pull, and then I had to pull them apart. I almost read a section from June in which June is very funny too. And given the reading you just heard, you might think this book is not funny at all, but it is. And so is Jamie's in certain parts too, very funny. But June is a kind of joker, and she has just found that she is pregnant, and she is going to have a baby, and she makes a different choice than her mother did, mainly because she's scared not to make that choice. But she jokes about picking up about getting pregnant, about picking up this mangy dog on the way to on a trip with her new husband, and so forth and so on. But Grace is more serious, and Grace gets into bigger trouble than June does, actually. But the voices had to be calibrated, and what I had woven together in terms of their childhood, I had to pull apart. So that was hard. It wasn't just one character, it was really two.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a question from Doug. Minrose, how did you come up with the name Holly for the male character?
Yeah, his full name is Hollister, and he was Hollister Jr. His father was Hollister Sr., and he had this kind of relationship with his father that was about a man has to take care of his family, a man has to do certain things, so I nicknamed him Holly because I wanted him to have a more feminine aspect to his name. He fights this all the way. Holly is in World War II. He shoots himself in his own foot in order to get out of World War II. But throughout the whole war, he believes, he thinks, and he dreams that he's carrying a baby boy in his belly, and he has to get home to Olivia in order for this baby boy to be born. And so I thought a more feminine name for Holly would be in order, for him would be in order. So that's why I made up the name Holly, and then I thought, well, what could that be short for? And I came up with Hollister. So that's how it happened.
Thank you. That was a good question, because I was wondering that too. It took me a while to place the name, and Hollister makes perfect sense. And sort of related to that, because your characters have in both books have meaningful names. So I'm not sure if that, obviously that was purposeful. We have Mercy, we have Heaven, and How Not to Drown. You have Grace and the Accidentals. So is that your way of conveying something about the personality of the character? It could have been, I don't know, they could have been Hope, they could have been other different names that, that have other, important meaning.
In my case, I would have to say that for the most part, the characters come to me with their names. They tell me their names, and I don't tend to argue with it unless there's a problem there. Sometimes you'll have a story and you've written a character named Roberta and another one named Rebecca, and somebody might say, well, it's a little hard to tell them apart, and then you change one of them. But I generally just, the characters name themselves. I don't know. What about you, Minrose?
I find that to be true sometimes. Sometimes not. Somebody told me once who read a draft of earlier draft of The Accidental, said, I don't know about the names Grace and June. And I said, well, I don't have anything to tell you defends the names Grace and June, which I guess is what you're talking about. But it just seems right to me. But
I thought they were right. I thought they were great names for them.
Thank you. But I think Holly was a more calculated choice. So I can go either way on that. Yeah. But if there aren't any questions coming in right at the moment, Jaimie and I were talking about one of the things we were talking about that's kind of interesting, I think, is in terms of the women and girls in our books. And Jaimie writes, I think you write really good girls too. I mean, you have a great insight into girls, particularly, adolescent and early age girls.
My inner girl is still there.
Your inner girl is still alive.
All these years later, she's still there.
Yeah. But I think one thing that the flyer for this event mentioned was that we were going to talk about strong women. And I like to kind of kick that back and forth a little bit, if we still have a little time, about what makes a strong woman character, and what does it mean to be strong. Anybody, Jaimie, you want to jump in?
I have a feeling we're probably going to be thinking similarly about this, because a lot of times somebody will hear the word strong woman character and they're going to expect somebody who can do it all. She's a mom, she runs a Fortune 500 company, she's works at an animal shelter and saves abused puppies, and she no, that is not, at least that's not my kind of strong woman character, and I don't think it's Minrose's either. And I think what's important, and a lot of times what strong really means is complex. Developing a character, a woman with complexity. We're talking, well, we want all our characters to be complex, but we're talking women right now. And I think this is important too for readers to understand. There was a while with the expectation that feminist novels, for instance, would have that sort of power woman, and who could do it all and was all, and she could diss the men and this and that and the other. Those characters are not actually that interesting to me to write about. I want somebody who has to, yes, probably really work for whatever success she has, but also has flaws, like we all do, has times when that success is overwhelming and then can't reckon with it, like Amelia, who had success for a while in a job that really forces you to be a young woman. She had success for a while, she did well, she was able to support her family, and then that stops. And so what happens to her? Does she fold up and die? No, she becomes kind of tough on the outside, and she calls people out on the ageism, but at the same time, she's vulnerable inside. That to me is a strong woman. Complexity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing you're the same way, Minrose, probably.
Well, yes,
similar.
Of course, we want all of our characters to have complexity. I worked pretty hard on trying to get the husband some complexity, particularly when we found out that he tricked his wife, Olivia, into an abortion. I mean, pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy. But I just add to what you're saying, Jaimie, and second it. But I also think that one of the things I always try to work with my characters is struggle. I try to make them struggle. And through struggle, as we all know, I think, most of us anyway, who haven't had perfect lives, struggle changes us. It makes us stronger, and it creates our lives in ways that we did not anticipate at all. And it changes us. It changes us in basic ways. So I always look for struggle in a character, but also a change in a character. And I think there's a really big difference between a strong woman and following up on what Jaimie's saying, and a strong-willed person, or a determined person, or whatever. There has to be a certain sense of self-consciousness, I think, and self-awareness, for which goes along with your thoughts about complexity in a character. It's not too terribly long ago. There are certain major exceptions like Madame Bovary or Anna Karenina, or characters like that. But in the Western tradition, there haven't been just a whole lot of complicated, struggling women characters. They've been more kind of sidekicks to the main hero figure. And so the notion of a woman character is not all nice. I mean, we can say hats off Macbeth for, hats off Shakespeare for Lady Macbeth. But there are, a lot of women characters who are pretty cardboardy, in the Western tradition. So right. I guess those are the things that make me think, about a strong woman character.
Yeah, I like what you said about struggle too, because it's why we write fiction, right? And it's something. Robert Olin Butler said something about where you take to create a plot, you take a character, and you make that character desire something so bad. They want something so bad, and then you put something in the way of that, so that they can't have that thing, and then let them go at it. And then that creates conflict, and it creates depth and complexity in a character for the reasons you are saying, because struggle changes us, it defines us, it makes us more empathetic, or it could also make us more mean and angry. I mean, there's all kinds of things that come for it, but it doesn't let us just cruise easily through life on an armchair. It will not let us do that. And so we don't want our characters to do that, because that wouldn't be a really interesting novel to read.
No. And one of my writing teachers once said, "You've got to have trouble in River City."
You've got to have trouble. Trouble is conflict.
Barriers. You've got to have trouble. Yes.
Yeah, we do.
Well, we have time for one more question or comment. I see that we have someone joining us from Japan, Akiko, and you are muted. So did you want to say something, Akiko? Please.
Today I had a great time. Thank you so much. Great presentation. And I'm due to latest terrible news, I'm so worried about situation. So today's presentation encouraged us to stand up strongly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akiko.
Thank you.
That was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we can wrap up. This has been wonderful. I'm so glad that we have this recorded and we'll be able to watch this again. So especially for people who haven't read the books yet, get your hands on a book, either from the Village Bookstore, or you can find a copy through the Westchester Library System. And these are important topics. And I'm imagining that your forthcoming books will also continue touching on many of these issues, the social, the climate issues and social issues, and strong women, because we all know them. What is that saying? May you be that, may you be them. I forget how the saying goes. May you raise them, May you be them and may you know them, something to that effect.
Mhm.
Maybe not in
Nice.
that order. So thank you so much to both Jaimie and Minrose for sharing your evening with us and telling us so much about your books. And they are very, they're inspiring, especially as Akiko said, with everything that's going on, even in this day and age. So we appreciate it. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for
Thank you for
coming.
having us.
Yes.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. Then stay in touch. Let us know about future projects. And hopefully, maybe someday we'll be able to welcome you to the Harrison Public Library in Westchester. Wouldn't that
Yeah,
be
it'd be lovely.
exciting?
That would be fun.
Yeah.
A little bit of a trek, but if you're in New York or New York City, then, which I know Binghamton, yeah, that's like within our
It's the
area.
bus ride down there.
There is, it comes to White Plains, so
Yeah.
at the community center. So, I mean, we could, I don't think there are any other questions, but if anyone does have any questions, you're welcome to ask them now. I'm going to conclude our recording for this portion. Thank you.